Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of The Meta with Kin. That's me. If you've not, well, let me pause this video actually. It's a great video. um, Very entertaining. Anyway, if you've not been here before, this is a show about the GAC meta, what's going on, what's happening. Right now, I'm doing it once per season, especially now with the shrunk seasons of 3 weeks long. It's better than trying to do one in the middle of the season like I was doing for a while. I still have some thoughts of putting one sort of near the end of the season and then beginning of the other season, but we'll see how it works out. Mostly depends on what goes on with Datacrons. It's amazing the impact that Datacrons have on GAC and TW. And that's mostly what this season's about. Anyway, what this episode's about. Anyway, for those who don't know me, I watch an enormous amount of GAC fights. I participate in the top 50 or 100 of one. I have a 10 million-ish whatever roster, but really I watch a lot of GAC fights because, well, for the counter tool at Grand Arena Science, and also that's for me at least one of the ways that I learn. Although that has been not as much the case now with Datacrons. They require a lot more of individual thinking time and brain power to take them into account to be effective, I think. I don't think that's going to change in this upcoming season. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh yeah, also for some of the stuff I'm going to talk about later, about sort of a little bit about game design and how the balance is shifting and how I think the game is actually changing, how CG, the developers, are trying to change the way that the game is played a little bit. My background in my career, my sort of first career, about 15 years long, a little more than, was in software development, not as a game developer. I started out as an actual developer. I'm a terrible actual developer though. I moved on into like the operation side of things and then delivery and management and upper management and stuff. Anyway, I had a career in software development, so I know a little bit about how the delivery cycle and not so much for games, but for like user behavior and stuff like that is in general, a very important metric on how priorities are shifted and features are developed. Like all features, really, in any professional software product, all features are based around user behavior. How's the user going to engage with it? What are they going to do after they are using it, when they're using it, and after they're using it? And I think we see that a lot in what CG is doing with Datacrons. And maybe I'm putting a whole bunch more thought into it than it deserves, but I find it fascinating and very interesting to see how it's playing out, literally as well as figuratively. So I'm going to loop this video a few times in the background. It's pretty awesome. It's from Art of War. He's a Russian language YouTuber, does some great YouTube, and he streams as well, I believe. Yeah, he streams on YouTube, but he has some really cool GAC content, and he has a few accounts he plays with. And this is a fun video that showcases what is possible with Datacrons. Amazing. So, in this video, we're going to be talking a huge amount about Datacrons. I don't want to say it's going to be my longest video yet, but it certainly is a possibility. So I started thinking about how I would structure this as the season started with the Inquisitorious set of Datacrons, but my thought process changed a little bit with the details around Season 2, not necessarily just for the Datacron specs themselves, but for the changes that CG made in terms of the acquisition rate for Datacrons, which I did expect to happen, but I didn't think it would be so strong, severe, so much. I didn't think they would do so much, or it's so easy to get Datacrons now. like for instance, I think most regular players that don't spend any money at all and just do the conquest currency and stuff can get like three, I think three level nines and another three levels, maybe not three level six, but three level nines, re-roll them each a few times, and 10 level threes if they want. Free, totally free, no extra energy costs or anything, just what you would do for conquest. That's amazing. Well, I mean, it takes time, but crystal-wise. So this is my analysis now after we only had details for the first two sets of Datacrons. Once the third set, remember these first three sets are still the exhibition phase, sort of like when GAC, well, when Grand Arena came out, had like a 6-month period of exhibition before it became Grand Arena Championships. So I am positive they'll make changes to the Datacron model in general, but we haven't even gone to the third of three, so who knows how much it could change. So everything what I'm saying now is based upon the current data we have just from 2 months and how I think it's working. So my focus obviously on Datacrons and everything we're going to talk about here is how they influence GAC and to a lesser extent territory wars. I don't care so much about territory wars compared to GAC. I love the combat aspect of it, but anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But now with Crystal, half or more, or really more, your Crystal income being tied to GAC, yet I think Datacrons actually have obviously a large impact on the overall game balance and advancement system. Not the only advancement system, but let's say end game advancement system for this game with crystals from GAC. So I structured this in like Datacrons and the meta part 1, 2, and 3. So the first part is this right here. Why do people hate Datacrons? And I don't even want to say that people hate Datacrons. Why do so many people express so much dislike about Datacrons? This is content creators, forum posts, Reddit, Discord, the official forums, Discord, Reddit. It's not the most popular thing. Or it's very easy to find things about it that are dislikable, I guess you could say. So I've tried to summarize them in 3 areas. Again, this is just part 1 of my 3 Datacrons and the meta points, but in part 1, I split it up again into 3 different parts. So people say that's a pay-to-win system. Of course it is. There's no question. Every part of this game, with the exception of like Omicrons and Zetas, sort of, is pay to win. And usually you can pay to win a lot more than you can play to win. Again, Omicrons and Zetas being this like the part of that that's not necessarily true. Those you still can pay and get more, but you can't like double, triple, quadruple your amount like you can with like basically everything else by paying. I think this is a big issue for many people because, especially with the first set's acquisition rate, it was affecting a part of the game that many people, especially the players who visit the forums and give feedback on things, tend to take the game seriously, and as part of that, most of them engage with GAC to some level. Keep in mind I don't know the actual number from the latest investor. I don't think they've ever said active players, or it has been a few years since they've active players, but there's millions of active game players who log in on a regular basis, but there's only about 500,000 people who play actively GAC. And of those, I don't know, let's say maybe 10% are active on less than 10% are active on the forums and Discord and stuff. Between 5 and 10% probably. So it's just these vocal people who take the game seriously that are having problems with expressing the most amount of issues with Datacrons. So that's, I think, why they find it very frustrating. But especially with set 2, I think what many people, or maybe they're not as whining, whining is not a good term, I'm not trying to discredit their issues. Maybe they're not as vocal now after set 2 came out, especially because set 2 is very, 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 very easy to get with Conquest. And with TW actually gives pretty good rewards too, but that's sort of like 50-50. Most guilds win, 50% of their matches, so it's about the same for everybody on average. But you can easily get 3 level 9 Datacrons with just Conquest farming. So that's pretty awesome, gives you a lot of choices. None of the Datacrons in this new set are really that bad either, the DC9 ones. There's a lot of the DC3 ones are not great or very niche, but the DC9 ones are pretty good. Temporary, that's what a lot of people say. Well, even if you pay, then it's going to go away. Yeah, so don't pay. Then you don't care if it goes away. It does take time. It does definitely take time. It's a confusing system to learn. It's new, so everybody's learning it. I'd argue that it's not actually that confusing, but it's definitely very new, and it's taking people a while to understand exactly what is good, what is not good, to think about that. There's way more moving pieces than mods, which this is the closest system to, I think. Again, I'm not going to read everything I wrote here. There's just my notes as I was preparing for the show. I will say though that I think the outrage, again, I'm reading what many people say on the forums, the outrage about this system, Datacrons are going to kill the game, is not as much nearly as relic levels, or I think mods were very similar. Like, yeah, mods were probably the mods, relic levels, and now Datacrons. And that severity, I mean, there's less people active on the forums in each of those other times, but I think those two were more severe in terms of the relics, especially like the game's over when relics came out. So obviously it's not over, and it's not going to be over with Datacrons. I think Datacrons are, my personal opinion, they're amazing. From a fighting, combat, GAC perspective, it's awesome. So many different choices to make. So, talking about choices and losing and winning. So, the second part of the why Datacrons suck, or why I think people think they suck. The second one of these, number B here, is counters don't work anymore, and you lose. Well, yes, for sure this is the case. I think the part of this that many people, or obviously they're complaining because of this aspect, but they're not thinking a little bit in the future once they know it. Like, everybody has to learn a new system, so for sure you're going to lose. You're going to make mistakes and fail fights. Like, the amount of people I've seen just face rolling on their keyboard into a fight that is impossible to win, like, oh, let's give it a try. If they had taken 15 seconds and thought about the abilities on the Datacron, they would know that it's not going to work. But many people don't do that. They're just used to following the same old, same old. So it's going to take some time. The part that is definitely sort of new, although this is offset by something else I think is happening in terms of the overall game design. I'll talk about that later. The amount of time to learn each Datacron set, which only lasts, the combinations of which only last for 1 month, because you have to think about there's going to be theoretically 3 sets going on at the same time, but each month 1 set goes away and you get a new one. So all of these different sets, you have a month period where they interact with each other, and the month that they do interact, you're probably only getting half of the total power of that Datacron set in the beginning of that GAC season, because remember, each set only exists for 3 GAC seasons. And also, some of them are going to be like 2 5v5, 1 3v3, or 2 3v3 and 1 5v5. Like, the sets will rotate off which they affect. And the sets affect those 2 different game modes very, very, very differently. We'll talk about a bit of that. We'll talk about that a bit at the end also. So there are so many variables here I think people will, after a few months, they'll get the idea of scouting based upon Datacron, the Datacron um, abilities, mechanics, but the actual possibilities that exist with the 3 active sets of Datacrons, the 2 GAC modes that seem to be now switching back and forth, and of course TW. It's just awesome. And sort of the best part is you can test this in arena. Obviously not the Omicrons, which is annoying, but the Datacrons themselves you can test in arena. That's pretty cool. So many interesting videos going on about that. This video is almost done. Let's go to the end and watch his mods here. Back to the beginning. We'll loop it a few times. You can enjoy watching it. And this is especially, like, on one hand, with set 1, talking about complexity here. Why do Datacron suck? 3 parts. Second one here is complexity. Lots to learn. Well, not complexity so much, like lots to learn. My stuff is failing. My shit's failing. So now that there are so many more Datacrons available with the acquisition rate they introduced with set 2, it effectively multiplies the complexity by 3 in a way. Because it's sort of like 2 to 3 times the amount of materials are now available. That's my understanding based upon my not amazing math. So with 3 times let's say 2 times the amount of Datacrons available, it doesn't mean it's 2 times as complex. You could effectively think it's like 2 times 2 times 2, because you have twice as much available each of the 3 months. So it's a multiplicative effect rather than an additive effect in terms of how the different Datacrons can work together versus other sets, versus other teams, factions, etc., etc. It's definitely a lot to learn, and especially it's changeable. It's always going to require this additional information if you want to keep a certain level of complexity or of knowledge about the complexity of the Datacrons. Yeah, a part that I do find interesting is I don't actually think Datacrons are going to shake up the, like, let's say, I don't want to say top 100, let's say like top 500, between top 100 and 500. Yeah, let's say 10%, 20% of those players just don't care or have the time to engage with Datacrons. So they don't, and they drop out of the top 500. But most of the players in the top 500 are spending a lot of time on GAC already, and none of the players are suddenly going to get more time. Oh, I have another hour every attack round to spend. No, they'll have the same amount of time. So I don't really think it's going to change the top end a bit. In some ways, it's going to make it more insulated at the beginning. And this could be over time it would shift depending on what changes are made to the Datacron model. But it's the players that already have a hard time with, like, mods, for instance. There's a lot of players who don't really know or do mods very well outside of what they're told in TW. And so for them to learn Datacrons and figure out Datacrons on their own it's just not going to happen. So these players are going to struggle the most, I think. And it's unfortunate because I think it's these players that benefit the most from Datacrons. In terms of how Datacrons fit to their teams, they're far simpler than mods. Like, you have 1 Datacron for an entire team versus 30 mods for your entire team. That's way less complicated to figure out. I do think that, like, mid-sized players with a GL or 2 or 3 or something have the most potentially to benefit from Datacrons, because already you can get into, Kyber. You can get into Kyber for sure with 1 or 0 GLs. You can get this Kyber 1 with like 1 or 2 GLs. And now with Datacrons, where just like in this this awesome video, keep in mind it's arena, so, like, it's not GAC quality mods, but still no GLs, and he kills all the GLs. Of course, it's a souped up Datacron. with the right 6 and 9 um, traits, and especially the secondary traits. But anyway, there's a lot of advantages to be had for inside players. Third of this, why Datacrons are suck. They're complicated and they're not really clear in game how to make sure you maximize your acquisition. Like mods, at least you have separate mod farming node and separate mod energy. Datacrons you just have conquest and territory wars. So I think this might change a little bit personally. I'm not sure how, but it feels like this is not what CG intended necessarily. Or maybe they will start giving it out on when you beat every single conquest node, they'll give you some Datacron energy. I don't know, but I think definitely something is going to change a little bit in the acquisition of energy, or currency rather. Especially to get people more used to it so they can generate money from the Datacron roll. Right now it's re-rolling that generates the money. In TW, I don't think it's quite as big of a deal as in GAC, this complexity level, because usually in guilds, your guild leaders will tell you, hey, look for these Datacrons for TW, or you'll have guild chat, you can ask questions and stuff like that. But in GAC, it's much, much different. I mean, you can copy what they say in TW. It's great. It's better than nothing for sure. But I think obviously like the competitive players who take GAC more seriously, just copying what you have in TW is usually not, it doesn't help you compared to other players of your skill level. Yeah, what about cheap? That is one thing too. Datacrons are incredibly cheap. If you look at it like the cost of mods versus the cost of Datacrons, you don't really get any mods for free. I mean, you do the assault battles, I guess, and some of the assault battles and some of the other like weekly, monthly events. But that's it. It's like nothing. You have to farm mods. Datacron, you don't really have to. I mean, do conquest, farm defeats. There's no separate battles you have to farm or sim or whatever every day. Just do conquest. I think that's very attractive. It's a nice, very appealing way to acquire them and allow people to get a lot of power for free, basically. So that was the first section, why Datacrons suck. This is going to be a hugely long video. I hope you guys are doing something where you can pay attention to this. Or have it on in the background or something. So the second part is what will actually change, or what has changed in GAC. You know, what have Datacrons changed during the actual GAC match? And if this is different for each person, I wrote a lot of this. I don't know how much I'm going to talk about. I covered it a lot in the first broad topic already. But basically, the way that I see it, in actual GAC, the main thing that Datacrons have changed is counter selection. Well, counter selection and scouting. So scouting, in a way, is much easier. Like, the priority is now not to look at every single opponent's character's speeds and figure out, okay, they modded this way, this that way, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's not that it's not important, it's just way more important which Datacrons they have. And especially when we have 3 sets, this is a very well-made video, entertaining. Especially when we have 3 active Datacron sets, every single team will have a Datacron. So yes, to some extent, it still matters, you know, is your JKL modded for offense? Is the turn order on your JKR or JKL team versus, you know, Supreme Leader Kylo Ren? Is that turn order set correctly? Do your bounty hunters have correct turn order? But honestly, most of that is all offensive. That's your modding. It's not necessarily the opponent's modding, which will be important, but it's still not as important as checking the Datacrons they have and knowing that if they have Datacron X, Ray's ultimate damage Datacron, you have to keep SLKR or Ray or JMK um, as an offensive option to beat those teams. It's that type of decision making that many people I feel are missing out on now, or don't even pay attention to at all, and they end up getting losing. I mean, effectively, that's what it is. So this is something that I do think needs to take some time for people to realize, but just this basic scouting makes such a huge difference. And I really think that most people I've seen lose are because they don't do this level of scouting. So they see a team with the Datacron, like, oh, gosh, the opponent has this Datacron. Whatever am I going to do? Well, I mean, did you check beforehand when you didn't have any GL that they had a GL and you didn't? Like, if they got the GL first, you have to check this sort of stuff. There's no way around it in the era of Datacrons. And second is, it sort of ties into the first, obviously, but flexibility. Using your own Datacrons on offense or on defense. Like on defense, it's just as important. But on offense, keeping your Datacrons for countering specific other Datacrons or for using a team, no GL team to beat any GLs, right? This is an extreme example, and this is just arena, but conceptually, this is very possible with all sorts of setups. So players who are flexible and are able to be creative with their Datacrons get an enormous advantage in this new world that we have, this new Datacron world that we have here. Yeah, and interesting. We'll talk about modding a little bit in the future, but modding is, again, it's not unimportant, but it's important, has definitely taken a second tier for those players who have many of their teams at Relic 3 and above that can use Datacrons. Because the boost you get from Datacrons is far more than the boost you get from just mods. So a few speed here and there, a few percentage offense here and there, that's nothing compared to what Datacrons do. For better or for worse. I mean, some people don't like this. I think mostly that's people who invested a lot into their mods and are used to the system, and now there's a new system that devalues their existing system that they like and are prideful, I guess, about. And change is the only thing in the world that's constant, and people don't like it, so frequently don't like it. Yeah, oh man, I had to say it was heartbreaking watching GAC many times. People would, even before Datacrons, people would take in a counter that you could just check GG for 30 seconds and see that counter is not going to work. And guess what? We're watching this video again. But now, with Datacrons, not only do they not check GG to see if it works in the first place, or maybe it does work on GG, but it's not going to work when the opponent has this Datacron active on their team. Like, they don't even think about it. Like, should I take in my, whatever, should I take in my Ray against this opponent Ray? They have the additional alt charge, like 6% each time they gain alt charge. Gosh, I wonder how that's going to work out. It doesn't work out very well. But that's not a complicated decision to make. Like, that's... It's sad and funny and sort of frustrating watching and knowing that these are going to turn into failures, but it's happening way more often because a lot of people just don't check Datacrons or don't spend time to think about what they do. And many of them don't require a lot of like advanced theory. Just, oh, this does now twice as much damage. This team that barely beat them before, they're going to beat them now? No, probably not. Anyway, sad, but funny. And it's not going to get easier. Like, this is the part that is going to, in this general, how do Datacrons, how have they changed GAC? This part here is going to make the biggest influence for some time to come. Last point, Datacrons in the meta. How is it changing the whole game? this part I could talk about for a very long time because because it's fascinating to me. Um, for my play, let me say first of all, for my play style, the way that I've always played this game, it's great. I love it. I'm sort of like I like to do well at the game, but I don't like to spend hundreds of hours. Like, I don't like to, I love spreadsheets, but I don't try and make my spreadsheets perfect, if that makes sense. I like to organize things and have a plan, but I don't like going over every single little tiny detail. I don't like to spend the time doing that, honestly. Um, so, so effectively, I think Datacrons are changing the way that CG expects the end game. By that, I mean uh, players in the top, 20% of the GP, something like that. I don't know. I don't know a good exact definition, but players who've been playing for a while, who have most of the characters, a quarter, a half, a third, maybe of the roster is at relic levels. Um, they know most of the mechanics decently well. They can do all of the events and activities in the game. Um, so that's sort of what I do as end game, and I think the design of the game, CG is trying to change how that works. The whole structure, I think they're trying to change the whole structure. So let's go into some details here. How does advancement work? How do people advance their account, their characters, their ships, their roster, their power level? Um, so I think this is important to try and explain how I view the game, or how I viewed, or why I think Datacrons are changing the end game model. So first of all, you started out just had characters. You could spend time or money and give yourself more characters or buy their gear or something like that, right? And you only needed 5 characters for arena, and you only needed to be active in arena. Well, it depended on where you were and what arena shard, but let's say an hour. Many players were like, oh, just 5 minutes. They had a very organized shard, great, or they didn't care about being in the top 5, for crystals and stuff. But let's say it took you an hour and you needed 5 characters for competitive players. Then in July 2016, mods came out. The end of the game, for sure. CG was trying to kill the game before it really even started. I'm joking, obviously. Mods were the Datacrons 0.1, or Datacrons really are sort of like mods 0.2, I think. So this added a huge amount of complexity compared to what was already in the game. There was some pay to win, like always with mods, not necessarily right at the beginning, but after a few months. And obviously the first, mod debacle, whatever, for the first few days where stats were just crazy, just like Datacrons, huh? Interesting. So it's sort of like they wanted to maybe send the game down this route from the beginning, but didn't really do it in a successful way. Anyway, that's just speculation. I have no clue. But mods came out, right? People figured out how they work, adjusted their resources, but still, you needed your mobs on your arena team, and for raids and stuff, other teams, but the UI was not great, and it was annoying switching, and blah, 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 blah. Then, later that year, November 2016, ships happened. People love or hate ships, love and hate ships, who knows? But you now needed more than 5 characters. You needed your ships leveled, and you needed the pilots for those ships leveled. And of course, you wouldn't just level your 5 characters, because you had raids to do. You needed your raid teams, territory wars. There were teams. Well, territory wars for next year, right? Yeah. Territory wars, October of 2017. So now you started needing a lot more than just your pilots and your arena team and your raid teams. And this is when the PvP, player versus player, competitiveness started happening a little bit for this game, because before it was just an arena, which was, I don't want to say competition as much as like just you would hate the people who would snipe you. It's very petty and not really competitive. A little bit, but like competitive in the same way that you drive to work, you know? You can't really call driving to work a competition. It's just something you have to do to get your rewards, even if you're trying to get there faster than some other drivers. Anyway, finally, Territory Wars came out. Huge deal. And you started seeing like Territory War meta bleeding into Arena and vice versa, like the Titans team, you know, from Arena that would be in some Territory Wars when guilds had a bunch of whales together in the same guild. That's when some of the huge guilds started forming for that particular purpose. And in August of 18, you had mod slicing come into play. And this is really where I think where theory crafters started to take off. Because with mods and with mod slicing in particular and upgrading and stuff, this is when meta started being influenced by mods rather than by characters. Or, of course, they're still influenced by characters, but mods played more of a role in changing the meta than characters. Because with correct modding, you could get counters to work that never would work otherwise. This is when I would say more serious competition started, and people would began to realize that when you have a focus on mod, you can give yourself a big advantage in the mainly Territory Wars, but also Arena. You know, if you had amazing mods, I love that part of the video. I made the same comment last time I played through. Anyway, you could give yourself a huge advantage if you focused on mods in Territory Wars and keep your position #1, you know, for a few days if you're in a crappy Arena shard or something. Or you were the only whale in the Arena shard, perhaps. Then, in December of 2018, Grand Arena happened. Now you need way more, and this is not Grand Arena Championship, by the way. They had an exhibition for Grand Arena 2. It was like 6 months long almost. Anyway, you needed a way larger amount of characters. This is very close to Territory Wars, I think, in total characters. And the goal was essentially collecting points. There was no real competition compared to building your roster. Like, and many players also manipulated their roster a little bit. Once some of the matchmaking prioritization was theorized out a little, they would manipulate their roster to give themselves better matchups. And most players, like if they, you know, in a season where you would play 12 other people, most competitive matches, or you would have at most competitive matches, maybe 2 or 3. Most of them you would, if you are a serious player and you like optimize your roster, you would stomp your opponents, like crush them with no real chance. It would just who got more points. So really not competitive. It's just like who can score more points, right? Just winning was what you expected. Losing was outside of the norm, which is great for the very few people who are winning all the time. Terrible for the vast majority of everybody else, which is why GAC participation at that time was like going down a cliff. So then they changed the structure a little bit over time. But then finally, at the end of last year, when they put crystals into GAC and they changed the matchmaking from roster advancement to take into account player, I don't want to say skill. It is a big part of player skill, attention, roster. I mean, obviously having a huge roster makes a huge difference. You can have all the skill you want, but unless you have, until recently, unless you had the mods and the characters available, it doesn't really matter. You know, if somebody has way more power than relic levels, you know, on their characters than you do, you can't take gear 12s against gear, you know, relic 5s and expect to win. Impossible. But still, skill played a role because players who were more creative, who spent more time learning specific counters, modding their team a certain way, would get an advantage. And that really just, the older the player, you can look at the top of most of the, well, Kyber won, I guess, a couple seasons ago. And like almost everybody in the top 50 are top probably top 1,000 account sizes. Now there's a big change, right? You can be in top 50 and have the 900 largest account. Great, you're more skilled in some way, but at the same time, the actual character difference between the 900th account and the #1 account, they still probably have all of the same characters. Maybe one has 10 more relic characters, and some of them have like 57 relic 8s, and the other one has 10 relic 8s, but that doesn't really make that big of a difference when you're fighting each other. A little difference, yes. A big difference, no. Let's start this video over for the 17th time. The point I'm making is until Datacrons, players' success in GAC depended on a large part on their long-term, their resource management game. Which characters did you have? Are your mods good? Are your mods great? How are your mods compared to the other players? That was essentially GAC. The success of GAC. So, matchmaking did change it a bit. From a game design perspective, like collecting your way to the top is an MMO style mechanic in general, where they expect people to play for a long time. And collector gacha games, like this game is a bit. The challenge with that model in this particular game is that new players will never, ever, ever be able to catch up to older players. In one part, just because of how power levels and ability to compete is calculated, or was calculated without Datacrons. And also in part because the amount of new units they put in the game is enormous. In this particular game, there's always new units. Well, maybe not enormous, but high, and there's always something. And usually the new units are more flexible or can do more things than old units, generally speaking. So newer players will never be able to compete in the top with older players without spending tens of thousands of dollars. And even then, their mods would not be able to match up. And that really makes a huge difference at the top ends. So, what do they do about it? I think Datacrons are a very powerful equalizer for competition. So, basically, again, this is only after 2 sets are released. I'm sure it'll change in some way after the 3rd set, and once all 3 months are done of this exhibition, 3-set exhibition that CG is doing right now. But it effectively, at a high level, I mean, obviously for players who don't even have Relic 3 teams, this is a moot point. It makes no difference whatsoever. So to get to the end game, nothing really changed. Once you're at the end game, I think this is where things have changed. So like, they're not making the process to get to the end game any different, really. They're just changing it for players who are at the end game. So instead of the end game being about your roster development skills and the time to spend on encounters and such, it is now much less about your roster development skills and much more about your ability to react in the moment in a month-long period, in a single season, to figure out what best beats opponents Datacrons, and what of your Datacrons are best used against your opponent's teams. So, like the advantage, let's say the trade-off of this. On one hand, the players who are super serious about GAC have such a huge theory crafting canvas to work with all these Datacrons. I mean, that's what this video is showing more than anything else. Stack a Datacron up to get all the bonuses for JKL, armor penetration, pre-post, etc. And you can do stupid things like this. But On the other side of things, suddenly mods are way less important. And mods are what a lot of players, either you acquire your units or, well, you acquire units and you acquire mods. Those are two ways you make your roster more powerful. Now, units are still there, of course. I would say that the importance of having niche units are much less or changed a bit, Now an R7 Ayla, a lot of people have that because of the Datacron. Before that, 10 people had R7 Aylas, I don't know. Maybe not 10, but not many. So it changed a little bit the niche unit calculation or prioritization. But in terms of mods at the end game, of course, the turn order, offense versus health, whatever, those type of things you still have to do. But at a very basic level, should you refresh 3 times 50 mods or 3 times 50 conquest energy? Or even take it a little more serious, should you refresh 350s and 300 mods or 350s and 300s conquest energy? Which will actually give you a better chance to win in GAC and TW? Right now, I think it is extraordinarily, like there's not even a question. The Datacrons are going to give you a better chance to win. And while this is effectively just switching your in-game resources, it changes what skills are valuable in the GAC game mode and TW again. But TW is a little bit different because you have currently in how things are organized, your guild mostly tells you what to do. So there's much less player skill involved. Although I actually argue that Datacrons make players still more important because in most cases, your guild is now giving you guidelines rather than step 1, 2, 3. Those steps are thrown off with the Datacrons depending on what Datacron they have and what Datacron you have. Anyway, in GAC, there's now more of an importance given to people who can figure out the combat tactics, I guess, for Datacrons. Jesus, this is going to be a long video. Which before have been useful and important, but not really that important. Like, most people theory crafted their fights out and they knew what was going to happen before the actual fight happened, and they didn't have to be good at thinking on their feet, whereas now thinking on your feet in a way, like during the actual fight, depending on what the Datacrons are doing, because just the combinations are so unique. Like, you cannot plan out all of the stat boot. Well, you can, but nobody will, or very few people will plan out all of the stat boosts that each Datacron is going to have that your opponent has compared to what yours are, and depending on which team but like there's way too many variables to control or to effectively predict and control. So I think that's changing the actual skills that will make competitive GAC players better quite a bit, and changes the resource prioritization of the game enormously. To me, it's a total game changer. Well, it really is effectively changes, at least in just 2 months, it changes how I look at the game. Personally, I'm more interested in the game because I like the constant things changing, creativity, having to figure stuff out. I mean, I love watching other people's videos and learning from them and just doing it myself, but it's way more fun to actually figure it out myself, for me at least. Yeah, so side effects of this. Yeah, mods are less valuable. Datacron selection and figuring out what is better is more valuable. It does make actually gear more important. The Relic 3, Relic 5 levels, so you can get the Datacron level 3 and level 6 effects to apply. That is interesting. I think everybody's pretty aware of that impact. So there's nothing particularly new. One thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, I'm talking about the DL3, 6, and 9. For instance, using this current set that we have now, the Enduring Codex, I think that's the name of it. It's not dark side, it's only light side, right? However, you can equip those light side Datacrons to your dark side teams. They will get no effect from the level 3 and level 6 or level 9 skills, but they get all of the static level 2, level 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8. All of those effects still apply to your dark side teams as long as they're relic 3 and above. I think many people aren't aware of that. It's the same with Inquisitorius, right? Like, there's no difference. I use plenty of light side Datacrons on my dark side teams, if that's just what I had left at the end of the fight, and I wanted to make sure I got max banners or something like that. So keep that in mind. Like, just because it's one faction or the other, I think for Enduring Codex, it's a little bit more important to realize this, because many of the passive stat boosts are huge, like bonus, damage, armor penetration. They still have health steal in there. So you can really, like this JKL here, you can just stack up their offense, critical damage, etc., enormously high. And for some characters like, well, I don't know, it really depends on what fight you're doing. Like, there's so many potential cool things that could work. Just remember, you can use your light side Datacron for all the passive stat boosts, just not the 369. I think going on mods and Datacrons. So this is something, is there another fight here? Yeah, this is something that I think is pretty interesting. Just time-wise, yeah, it takes a long time to learn Datacrons, but imagine not, once you get to the end game, and mods are less important than Datacrons at the end game, in the model we have working now. Would you care about spending time acquiring, upgrading, whatever, 30 mods for your team of 5, or one Datacron? One Datacron's a lot faster. To me, that's awesome. And they're relatively cheaper. Like, you're gonna not spend, most serious players spend money, crystals, let's just say crystals, okay? Not that they buy crystals at the store, but they spend crystals on mod energy. Probably they're going to spend crystals on conquest energy, but many of them will do that anyway. And I guarantee you that it's less than what you would spend on mod energy to get a quarter of the power increases. Again, it's very different depending on where you are in the game, right? If your roster only has like 4 or 5 teams that are relic 3 and above, well, yeah, then mods are way more important for you. But as you get further and further into the end game, with most of your teams, or half of your teams at least, could apply Datacron to, Datacrons are enormous value. Yeah, they go away, but if you're not spending money to get them, think of it, what you're going to get back in return when you can win one additional, in Kyber 1, one additional win is 600 crystals. That's 3 times 50 refreshes for 4 days, like a quarter of conquest. It's not bad. Not bad at all. Yeah, long story short, I think Datacrons are completely changing the game for the end game in particular, and I like it. But we'll see what happens. And yeah, this is just a little comment. I was mentioning it before. There's like 500,000-ish active GAC players. Of those, even the most popular content creators are getting like 50,000, I guess, views on their videos. 10% of the active GAC players, and plenty of those players or viewers don't even watch the game anymore. They don't even play the game anymore. Not a lot, but a good portion of them, certainly. So what we as passionate GAC, SWGOH fans may see and hear and talk about, we're really like the tip of the spear, to use a phrase that many people do enjoy, in terms of who actually engages with and uses Datacrons. So we're not really going to have a good understanding of what the actual in-game impact is for most players. So we'll be very curious what CG ends up doing after the exhibition season. Yeah, gosh, it's been an hour, and I'm see if I can rush through the rest. So, playstyles, teams. I'm starting over from scratch. There's only two types of playstyles that I saw this last season. You did pay attention to Datacrons. Oops, sorry about the camera. Or you didn't pay attention to Datacrons. If you did pay attention, you checked what your opponent has and kept something to beat it, great. But a lot of players didn't do that, and they only saw them like at the moment of fighting, and more of them lost. So that's it. I mean, most of the successful players are flexible, and they focus on having a strong offense. Surprisingly, I saw actually a lot more people going towards offense and full clearing rather than the sort of, knockout style that was very popular for a while. I think it was getting less and less, but still, there's a lot of players who played strong defense and tried to break through with off-tier counters, sort of, which oftentimes didn't work. So I know lots of players like that, and it's good for content creators too because it makes the matches really long. But for this last season, many more people were saving stuff for offense so they could beat their opponent's Datacrons theoretically, because they knew that if their opponent put it on defense and didn't have an option, potentially that's the end of the GAC for them. They couldn't pass the wall. I mean, there were ways, but Datacrons are complex, and many people didn't have the time to spend trying to think of lots of creative solutions. So there's very few places you can find counter information on Datacrons. Yeah, remember about the stats applying to either faction. And flexibility, this is no different than the last two seasons, and it's way more important in the Datacron world. Flexibility is the king, the queen, the empress, the emperor. The most important thing, you have to be able to adjust to what your opponent has and what you have. Fleet. Yeah, I would say fleet is even more important now with Datacrons, since more people than in the past tend to do full clears. So it comes down to fleet and what you can put on defense and make sure you one-shot your opponent's fleets. Raven's Claw, yeah, nothing special with this so far. I mean, I've seen some cool stuff, but I've seen plenty of, oh god, like some of the content creators made some videos using Raven's Claw and played it so poorly. Terrible. Like, you can easily try it yourself, but I understand people don't have 7-star Raven's Claw, so they can actually do that. But I think in this GAC season, we'll start to see some like real world examples of it making a difference in some setups. And then of course, the majority of people will wait until Profundity comes out and sees how that plays with the rebels, cargo ships, whatever. Rest of the stuff is repeat. You can read it if you'd like, just pause, but nothing different from last season. So I changed a bit my teams here, teams and units. I split it up into what's going on now with teams and units, and what's going on in the future with teams and units, to concepts and ideas, what's going on now and in the future. So this is teams and units now and in the future. So counter-wise, many counters aren't actually changed with Datacrons, surprisingly enough. By that, I don't mean teams don't require new counters, but many counters still work against teams with Datacrons in the same way they did against those teams without Datacrons. So for instance, Lord Vader, SLKR is still the best counter Lord Vader. Datacron really doesn't do anything. It actually hurts Lord Vader because he gets a full health and SLKR can one-shot him way earlier in the fight. So that's what I mean by many counters not changed. But Fennec against Lord Vader with the cooldown increase in Hellsteel, yeah, Fennec fails a hell of a lot more. So just keep in mind, and if you think about it, it's very easy to figure out, but that takes time and experience and time, really. And again, outside of Kyber 1, most people don't have a lot of relic-free teams. So it doesn't matter if they can acquire 57 Datacrons or 7 Datacrons, they're probably not going to use them, or they cannot use them. So Again, there's still thousands of players in the range that can use Datacrons on many of their teams, but the majority of the player base absolutely cannot. So I think that's another reason why CG is making this change now, because the majority of their players will be getting to this stage where this type of competitive play style, purely roster development or having an equal, or not equal, but an increased importance on actually like puzzle solving in the combat itself. I think that's why CG is making the change now. So as the majority of their player base develops and has elder accounts and game accounts, um, they'll have a better chance of competing rather than just being stuck as a second tier player because they don't have the best mods and spent years collecting them, in my opinion. So, some units. SLKR, I think he's the most powerful offensive GL now. You could say, to some extent, Jedi Master Kenobi is as well, but Jedi Master Kenobi actually has a hard time beating some Lord Vader teams. Mostly the arena setups with Grand Inquisitor and Ninth Sister in there, but we'll see some of those in GAC for sure as well. So I think right now SLKR has the edge for the most powerful offensive GL. It's really quite the circle, huh? Sortie, or 50 RT, the health stack build can time out a Relic Man Wampa on auto. Amazing. You have to have really good mods. Mods still do make a difference. And you could have some very interesting Datacrons to make that even more possible. But man, Sortie is an amazing character. GG still beats it though really easily. Darth Revan versus the Grand Inquisitor teams. I have not seen a setup where they had lost. I do know there's some losses on GG, but I think that's mostly like a gear differential or something like that. It seems like a very easy fight. You will still lose somebody. Usually you should have your Sith Empire Trooper there to die, because Darth Revan teams, Sith Empire teams, aren't actually immune to stun. They get stunned, but immediately dispel it and give themselves a stack of frenzy. Same with ability block. So you'll have to take, if the DC9 skill is there for Second Sister bonus turns, you'll take some damage from that, but you'll still win through pretty easily. And although who knows how long that's going to work, because we're going to have Malgus halfway through the season here. Although it's only 3v3, so it's different. We'll have Malgus, and that means Sith Empire is probably pulled away, so Grand Inquisitor is a little bit more scary if you're using your Sith Empire on defense. Fascinating, that whole interaction. Lord Vader on defense is the most powerful by a large margin. It's hilarious what influence a single content creator can have on people's opinion of something that is so far removed from fact. It's pretty funny. Start this over one more time. Yeah, hilarious. So, with this current setup, with all these powerful Jedi abilities, the Datacrons, Jedi Master Luke, Jedi Master Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker, they're probably going to be on defense. Let's be certain. Well, what's great against Jedi on defense? Inquisitors. It's going to be surprising. Well, not surprising. It's going to be interesting to see how well people prepare for that and use it. In threes, I think Qui-Gon with the Galactic Republic stun Datacron totally shuts down the nuke counter. It was like one of the best counters for this team. GL nuke no longer. It's going to be interesting. If you have the Omicron on Raider with potency for more stuns landing, that's very interesting. Gas is pretty easy to counter. I think people don't realize gas with the Stunacron, you know, stun Datacron. The Starkiller team is totally immune to stun. So it's a very easy, high banner, very reliable counter to use. A lot of people aren't aware of that for some reason. Radis is awesome. The Radis team, especially if you're Relic 5, you're a Rogue One team. Who doesn't have that, right? The counters you see on GG, CLS, Bounty Hunters, Gas, or Bad Batch, some of those are against Relic 5 Radis teams with Datacrons, but not many, hardly any. CLS versus Radis with Relic 5 and the Datacron. Could be the regen Datacron, could be the offense Datacron. That's a nice one. There's some interesting options there. It's a very difficult team. You'll see it in probably a month or so once it goes farmable, but it's a great team on defense. Quite powerful on offense too, but I think it's one of those defensive teams that can strip damage quite well, unless you have just the team to beat it. An hour and 5 minutes, my goodness. What is in the future meta? So let's talk about this a little bit. If you're going to evaluate where Datacrons fit, let's talk this. The way that I look at it, I mean, there's some good resources out there too. I think SoloBase put out a nice little video spreadsheet thing. A couple other content creators did. There's not a lot, but there's some. Look at the 3v3 counters from season 27. Look at these teams and think, how would a Datacron change this team? So here we have, well, anything with 100 and you're having gas included. So you're going to want to do some filtering, like take out the GLs, take off the percentile. So could a Datacron stop Wampa? Probably not very effectively. I think it's not worth worrying about. Could a Datacron stop Bounty Hunters? Probably. 4 debuffs in the 3v3 season, that's not very likely, so keep in mind the 4 debuffs one is going to be much less valuable, except on certain teams, just because there's only 3 characters you're fighting against. But regen when you get a buff, yeah, that could work decently well. Or just the static health steal. Imagine health steal on Django. Even health steal on Newt would be quite annoying. Doesn't make a big difference against Mando, but anyway, think going through each of these teams and think of your Datacrons and how they could make that team beat things that are sort of on the edge. 77%. Give them more health and protection. Make them beefier. That's going to make it more difficult for these sort of not timeout teams, but damage teams, I mean, the non-timeout teams. That's how I analyze my Datacrons for 3v3. That's the most practical advice you'll get from me this entire episode. Yeah, being able to evaluate your Datacrons and what your opponent has is incredibly, incredibly important. Hard, for sure, but very, very valuable as a skill just to sort of figure out. And much easier though than mod evaluation, because it's the impacts or the bonuses that Datacrons give are huge. So it's not as difficult as like looking at mods. Oh, this 2% damage increase. How much is it really going to affect? No, it's like 27% critical damage. That's huge. So any characters that were sort of on the edge of dying are going to die now. That's something to keep in mind. Team priorities from a relic perspective are super important. Like make sure that if you're focusing on a team that has Datacrons available or that benefits from the passives, it's like a stat-based team, Mon Mothma or something like that, you really want to make sure the whole team's at Relic 3 or Relic 5, I guess, depending on where you're at. But this is it's bringing back the whole concept of like finishing your team, instead of just taking 1 or 2 important characters to High Relic or to Relic. For Datacrons, you really have to have the whole team. So it totally changes resource spending priority. And the last thing that I will say, my God, I'm impressed at anybody who's still watching or listening after an hour and 10 minutes. Goodness. Never in the history of this game have there been so many ways for you to win or to lose at GAC. From my perspective, I love that. I love creativity and challenge and competition. even though it can be extremely annoying and frustrating, and it's a change, so it's tough to get used to. But I hope you enjoy your upcoming GAC. 3v3 starts in a couple days. And I hope you enjoy Datacrons. It's something new for players at that in-game level. I think you can stop worrying about mods as much, start worrying a little bit more about Datacrons. And good luck. Have fun. Enjoy GAC. And cheers.